This week, Congress is set to vote on the SAVE Act. You've heard us talk about this earlier. A proposed piece of legislation aimed at tackling illegal immigration and reforming the immigration system. The Guardian had this to say. One such piece of legislation is the so-called Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or SAVE Act, which would require Americans seeking to register or re-register to vote to prove U.S. citizenship. The Guardian goes on to say this dangerous bill would in effect strip millions of Americans of their access to the vote while making the voting process more difficult and burdensome for everyone else. Rather than make our elections more secure, the SAVE Act, the Guardian says, would disenfranchise millions based on nothing but a series of debunked conspiracy theories. My goodness. Here to discuss the bill and what it means for both national security and communities alike is Congressman Michael Cloud of Texas. Congressman, welcome back. Your reaction to the Guardian's very strong opinion about the SAVE Act.
Well, this is one of those issues that the only place this is partisan is in the halls of Congress and in this establishment media that have been propagating these kind of crazy ideologies for quite some time now. This is something the American people want. They want their elections secure. They want citizens voting to elect their representatives. This is common sense. And right now, when you compare us to other countries are much more strict in their elections than we are. The only people that would be disenfranchised would be people who shouldn't be voting in elections. And so that's exactly what it should be, exactly what the American people support. And this kind of crazy talk is just that, crazy talk.
Walk us through what you personally view as the more important aspects of this bill. What are the key provisions of this bill and why it's necessary in your eyes?
Yeah, it's very simple. Just when you go to register to vote, you should prove that you're a United States citizen. And it gives the authority to states to be able to do that, to secure their elections. This is something Americans want. And it's something when people come to this country properly and legally, they honestly expect. My wife is a naturalized citizen. And she fully expected to have to wait till she became a citizen before she would be allowed to vote. And this is something when people are coming here the right way, they assume that this is the right way that things should be done. This is about making sure that Americans are electing the American representatives. It's that simple.
You know, one major component of the SAVE Act is this emphasis on local law enforcement. How do you envision local law enforcement working with federal agencies under this particular bill? And do you see any challenges that might come of this partnership?
You know, this is just the right thing to do. We have a long history in our country of law enforcement working with law enforcement. And only recently, with the influx of sanctuary city talking points and those kind of things, have we seen to where we haven't had local law enforcement working with federal law enforcement. And of course, this is something where when I know in South Texas, we've had issues where different precincts have different things going on. This has been true. We've seen across the country where there's pockets of corruption that need to be addressed and dealt with. And so local law enforcement would be able to take action and work with our federal counterparts in making sure that our elections are indeed secure.
Well, it seems like, as you say, it should not be a very partisan issue, but we're all constantly being surprised in this political landscape.
With the American people, it polls 80%, though. So.
Yeah. Well, we've seen multiple judicial rulings coming out of several kind of fairly politicized benches across the country, including nationwide injunctions against key parts of President Trump's agenda. We've seen travel bans and other executive orders being struck down by judges, by one single judge sitting out somewhere in some federal bench. So obviously, this ongoing tension between the executive branch and the judiciary. How do you view the role of courts in checking the president's power in this new age where your colleagues are standing there saying, you know what, let's start thinking about ways to rein this in? Jim Jordan, I think, recently just said that he would like to see appropriations bill in future address these nationwide injunctions. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. This is a case where the judiciary is acting out of powers that they created for themselves, and certainly powers that the founders never intended for them to have. You know, if we were to speak to those who signed the Declaration of Independence, those who fought the Revolutionary War, those who crafted the Constitution that we all hold so dear, what they would tell you is that the executive branch holds the sword, that Congress holds the purse, and that the judiciary has no power over the sword or the purse. And the idea that somehow some federal district judge has the authority to usurp an election that the entire country has voted on over the executive, and they have somehow one individual in the judiciary branch has more power than the president of the United States to execute the laws of the land is just ludicrous on its face value. These are offices that by and large Congress has created, and Congress certainly has the power and authority to step in and to make sure that they're indeed upholding justice in our country.
Well, Congressman, let's take it one step further. I mean, these federal districts, these jurisdictions are created by the grace of Congress.
Yeah,
Congress
exactly.
wills their existence. The Constitution only allows the Supreme Court and the appellate process and the appellate courts, but beyond that, these courts they're not untouchable. Is there any
Yeah.
is there any fuel or energy behind yourself and your colleagues on the right to address the jurisdictions that we're dealing with here, to potentially strip jurisdictions, maybe start moving some of these districts around, shuffling them around?
Yeah, we definitely need to look at what we can do in the judiciary process. You know, there's a number of impeachment resolutions out there, and certainly a number of these judges are due a look at having them impeached, and what we can do to restructure these districts is very important. Ultimately, Congress, as you mentioned, does have the authority here to step in and to make sure that we are holding them accountable. They are not the most powerful branch, as they have kind of made themselves out to be, and they are not the last authority on the Constitution either. Congress has the authority to create these courts, to reshape these courts, and certainly to hold these courts accountable. They are not elected for life either, as has been assumed, and they kind of made themselves out to be. What the Constitution says is they are elected for good behavior. And when they step out of that, when they begin to do things that are clearly unconstitutional, when they begin to use their power and their authority in ways that the Constitution never imagined, when they try to undo elections from the bench, then that is not good behavior. And they certainly have a right for Congress to dismiss them from the role and from their authority.
I think a lot of Americans will be eager to see if your colleagues on the Hill will have those conversations, because it has been for so long a taboo topic. It's just something that we've never touched before. But under the Constitution, it's something that we can talk about. We should be talking about it.
We should be talking about it.
Hopefully there's a little more. Yeah, exactly. You've been a pretty vocal critic of taxpayer funding for NPR and PBS. We've seen the CEOs of these agencies defend themselves, defend the money that they've been taking in. You've cited concerns over bias and editorial practices. The usual counter-argument is that public funding is essential to maintaining journalistic independence and protecting these particular outlets from corporate influence. What are the merits to their counter-arguments there?
Well, there's a few things there. One, we're not where we were in the 60s when it comes to what's available in the media spectrum. Nowadays, we are overloaded with content, if anything, and it's upon the citizen and the user to wade through that and figure out what's good and what's accurate and what's not. What we do not need is taxpayer funding of these sorts of content anymore. And not from a practical sense, we certainly don't need it. And from what we've seen coming from NPR, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, where they end up producing very biased content. And the people that they're choosing to lead those organizations now have a long history of political bias. Some even saying it's more important to embrace activism than it is truth. And when those are the people who are leading these organizations, we definitely do not need taxpayer dollars funding it. They can exist on their own. They can exist as a private organization, and certainly any sort of outlet like that, any sort of platform has the right in a free society to have whatever opinion they want, but it does not need to be taxpayer funded.
Yeah, and we are shown daily, especially by DOGE, that the government and the taxpayer dollars that it uses has been operating on this model that is probably 100 years behind the times. And you see that in the way they document, our retirement funds, the way that they keep records, the way that they, operate our computers. We heard all of this in that amazing interview with DOGE recently last week. So, they've established pretty conclusively that the government is way behind on pretty much everything. I think a lot of people are hopeful that the DOGE kind of spirit of looking into these issues continues. Just because the DOGE people end up leaving sometime this year, I think there's a lot of hope that that continues on, even into next administrations, that we set some kind of precedent for ongoing investigations into issues like this.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Ultimately, this is about returning a good return on investment to the taxpayer. And where we are right now as a nation, when we're looking at $36 trillion in debt, we have to have a course correction. If our dollar is going to remain strong, if we're going to stay the world's reserve currency, if we're going to be able to preserve the liberties and a strong economy for our kids and our grandkids, we have to go through what may be the pain of a course correction here. And most of these agencies have bloated well beyond their original purpose, their mandate. They're not doing their job very well in accomplishing those things.
Yeah.
And so we've got to right-size them, get them back to the core functions, and frankly, we'll have a better functioning government for it. We'll be able to provide better customer service, so to speak, for the American taxpayer, and they're going to have a great product for far less cost in the end.
Congressman Cloud out of Texas, it's a pleasure to visit with you. Thank you. God bless. Coming up, Congressman Andy Harris out of Maryland joins us next. Some interesting headlines, not only in the national stage, but some headlines out of Maryland, too. We'll be right back.